everyone. My name is Adam Cassidy. I am a Teamcenter application engineer here at Prolim, and today I have this presentation on the Active Workspace client and how you can use it to manage your users and organization in Teamcenter. To start off, we're going to cover some of the basic concepts of your organization in Teamcenter. We'll talk about groups, roles, and users, Teamcenter licensing, and how you can use Active Workspace to create and modify these groups, roles, and people inside Teamcenter. Now, groups are relatively straightforward. They're used to organize your users into divisions. Groups can contain other groups and roles directly underneath them. Users would then be added underneath those roles. So you could have a top-level organization company-wide group, and then under there could be an engineering group, and under that engineering group could be another group. So they can nest like that. Each group has a default volume setting. I'll talk more about what that means later, but it's important to note that the default volume can be set either at the group level or at the user level, or both. Groups can be leveraged to permit or assign certain permissions. For example, in an out-of-the-box Teamcenter environment, a user will have a default group, and any data they create will be editable by members of that default group, but not editable by other users who are not a member of that default group. There's also a DBA group in Teamcenter. This is important for administration activities like we'll be covering later on. Now, roles inside Teamcenter, they're used to model the type of work a user will perform in a group. For example, you could have a reviewer role, and as part of a workflow, you could restrict a particular approval step so that it must be assigned to someone who has that reviewer role available. That reviewer role could then be added to, say, both the engineering and manufacturing groups or any other groups in your organization. All right, let's talk about users. Now, the concept of a user is relatively straightforward. This is the necessary information and ancillary information around someone who is logging in to Teamcenter. So on the right, you can see the list of properties. You'll have your user ID, which is the ID that is used inside Teamcenter. Then there's the OS name. This is the name of the Windows user account that user will be using when they go and launch Teamcenter to log in. This is a required field, but it doesn't necessarily have to match that Windows user account. However, if it does, then there's potential fallback mechanisms for issuing email notifications for, say, workflow assignments, etc. There's also an email address field that you can see near the bottom, which will be preferred for those sorts of communication. There's also a default group up at the top. So you can see in this case, this user, when they log into Teamcenter, they will be in the organization group. There's the volume and the local volume. So a volume in Teamcenter is simply a location where files are stored. This is really part of the Teamcenter server architecture. It's just a place on a hard drive that the Teamcenter server has access to where all of the data is stored. And by the data, I'm referring to files that users have uploaded for Teamcenter to manage. These are encrypted and there's various other things going on with it, but when you go to create a new user, you need to be aware of this so that you can assign the appropriate volume to them. For example, you might have half of your team located in New York with your Teamcenter server installation, and then you might have the other half located in California. The users in California would not have a very performant Teamcenter experience unless they had a cache server closely available to them on-site in California. That allows a volume to exist closer in California instead of sending those files all the way across the internet to New York every time an upload or download is performed. Now, there's various other details for how cache servers work, but the important takeaway here is if you have multiple volumes, because you have cache servers, you need to be aware of that and assign the appropriate volume based on the user's location and which cache server or FMS cache server is nearby them. A local volume is a temporary location on a user machine that allows files to be stored before they're transferred up to a proper volume on a server somewhere. Local volumes may or may not be used in your Teamcenter installation. They may provide performance benefits in certain situations, and they may represent a risk for if something were to happen to those files before they were uploaded to the server. Below volumes, we're now looking at licensing. So there's a license status and a license level. The license status will be either a 0 or 1. 0 is active and 1 is inactive, and you'll see those listed out if you go to modify this field. In Teamcenter, when you activate a user, they are then using a license. When you deactivate them, they release that license and it could be assigned to some other user, with one caveat. If a user logs into Teamcenter, then the license they used to do that is tied to that user until the end of the calendar month. So let's say that last month, which in this case is August, a user, we'll call him Bob, left the company, and I am going to deactivate that user this month, September. As soon as I deactivate that user in Teamcenter, that license will be available because Bob has not logged in during September. However, if Bob left this month and had logged in earlier this month, then when I go into Teamcenter in September and deactivate that user, that license will still be tied to that user account until October 1st, at which point it'll be freed up and available for assignment to another user. All right, so now let's talk about license levels. There have been a few different license levels available historically or as part of certain bundles or promotions, but the core types of licenses are authors and consumers. There's also an occasional author, which has the same permissions and ability as an author, but they are simply limited on how much time they can spend logged into Teamcenter. Consumers have a more limited set of features. They can only view, query, use basic viewer capabilities. On the chart at the right, you can kind of see a breakdown of some key feature differences between authors and consumers. As you can see, authors are the de facto license standard. They can do whatever they want, pretty much. Consumers are more limited. They cannot create items, but they can create data sets. This means that they would be unable to revise or create a new item in Teamcenter, but they could upload a PDF to an existing item. They wouldn't necessarily be able to start a workflow, but if an approval task was assigned to them, they would be able to complete it. You'll see there's a few notes here under the consumer column. Those are all relating specifically to the change management module in Teamcenter, That's an add-on module that implements full CM2 principles. And it's a little bit beyond the scope of what we're going to talk about here, but consumer has some extra and special permissions if you're following that model, just to make things a little easier. The other thing to note is that there is a admin license level in Teamcenter. This admin license level is used for 2 users, and it is not something you can purchase. It just comes with Teamcenter. So every Teamcenter installation will come with 2 admin licenses. One of them is assigned to DC Proxy, and the other one is assigned to InfoDBA. Those 2 users can never be assigned to any other license type. They always will be assigned to admin licenses. And you cannot assign an admin license to any other user. They can only be assigned to InfoDBA or DC Proxy. The DC Proxy user is utilized by the Teamcenter dispatcher, which you may or may not have configured. The InfoDBA user is used for the Teamcenter server installation process, as well as any subsequent configurations that need to take place. So, when you first log in and set up Teamcenter on the server, InfoDBA will probably be utilized to log in and set up the initial set of users who will be using the system, at which point that InfoDBA account can be utilized to add a new Teamcenter user with an author license to the DBA group. After that, day-to-day administration activities should be performed by that user account and not by InfoDBA. InfoDBA has some additional restrictions because it is a system-level account. For example, you cannot initiate workflows as the InfoDBA user. This is because of certain extra protections for any data that is created by that InfoDBA user account. But once you have a normal user account who is in that DBA group and role, that user account can be used to do anything a normal user could, as well as these sort of admin tasks that we'll go over. All right, so in order to interact with these systems, Active Workspace provides a special workspace called Active Admin. By default, when users log in to Active Workspace, they will be on the author workspace. However, they likely will not realize this because the author workspace is not able to be switched. Only users who are part of the DBA group can switch their workspace to Active Admin. This Active Admin workspace will have a set of tiles. It's just like a different home page. And one of these tiles, the People tile, allows you to manage your users and organization. All right, let's take a look at this. So, when a user logs in to Teamcenter, they'll likely be here on the author workspace. You click on your profile image in the bottom left, you can see I can change my group and role, but not my workspace. If I switch into the DBA group, the page refreshes. And now when I click on my profile picture, I have this workspace option. Under here, I have Active Admin and Active Architect. I'll select Active Admin. The exact tiles that are here and the abilities that are available will depend on the Teamcenter version, as well as which components have been installed at the server level. However, in modern versions of Active Workspace, what you're seeing here is Active Workspace 6.1. By default, you will have this People tile. Under here, we have this organization view. So you can see all the top level groups on the left-hand side of the screen. And as I select these, I will get information about that particular group. So under this engineering group, I can see the table of roles that exist. I could also open up this engineering group and be able to scroll through those same roles here. I can also see the subgroups that are available underneath it. At the top, you can see now underneath this organization, I've drilled down to the engineering group. Now I can always click back up at the organization to return to the top level. But first, let's say we wanted to create some group. I'm just going to go over to the right side here and hit New and Add, and I'll give this new group a name. I can give it a description if I like. I could set a default volume. In this case, I've only got one to choose from, and go ahead and create that group. If I go back up to my organization, you can see the group was created and it's listed here. If instead I wanted this to be a subgroup, I can hit Edit and Start Edit and change the to parent to whatever group I want this to fall under, say that engineering group. Now, when I hit Edit and Save Edits, it'll be available underneath my engineering group. If I select this webinar group, you'll notice I have an empty table of roles. Let's say we wanted to create a new one. I'll click the Add button and define a role. Now that is a brand new role that I just created. Let's say I wanted to add a role that was already available somewhere else in the organization. I can do that by the same method, just clicking Add, but instead going over to the Search tab here and finding some pre-existing role. Let's say we wanted this one, and then adding that in. Now, if I open up this webinar group we've created, you can see those two roles listed. And when I select one of them, you'll see this table of users underneath. Right now, this is empty. No users have been assigned to this particular group and role combination. But if I wanted to create a user, I could do that from here by clicking Add and filling in the required information. So let's give a username, a user ID, which I'll just make the same, and OS name. For the default group, I will select that webinar group we created. Default volume, status, you can see the 0 and 1 option, and it tells me that 0 means active here. License level, I will pick author. License server, it would default to this since it's the only option, but I'll select the default local license server anyway. Geography, nationality, address, there's a lot of other fields here. The one I'll make sure to fill out is this email address, as that's important for any notifications that would go to this user. And once I'm done, I'll go ahead and click Add. Now you can see that user is showing up in the user field. Similarly, if I wanted to add a user that already existed, I can click Add, go to Search, type in a query, and add the appropriate user. Now, if I want to go back to the top level of the organization, I can easily navigate to that from here as well. So, as you can see, you're drilling from the top level down into the appropriate group or the appropriate role or subgroup and adding the information that way. There are other ways of adding groups, roles, and users. At the top, we have groups, roles, and users tabs. These just list out all of the groups, roles, and users in Teamcenter. So this is the list of all the groups. They're not necessarily nested. They're just listed out flat, one after the other. Similarly with roles, here's all the roles available in this particular Teamcenter installation. And users is the same. From each of these, I have on the right the ability to create a new group, role, or user. So since I'm under the users tab now, I'm creating a new user, and I could fill out all this information. However, I encourage you to follow the instructions that I just gave and do this from the organization tab, at least whenever you're adding new groups, new roles, or new users, as this helps you to make sure that those groups, roles, and users are created in the proper location in your organization structure. However, if you wanted to remove or modify an existing one, it's often easier to find them through these other three tabs. So let's say I wanted to modify that user I just created. I can filter the list, find that particular user, and I have a couple of options at this point. Let's say I needed to modify this user's password. They were just created and I didn't set a password for them. I can just hit manage and then change password. Here, once I enter two matching passwords, I can then hit the change button and modify it. So as an administrator, I can't view users' passwords, but I can reset them. Now, if instead I wanted to modify this user's information, I can come over here and hit edit and start edit, and then make any changes or fill out any information that I desire. So perhaps I want to switch from an author to consumer, or deactivate this particular user. Once I'm done, I can hit save edits. And this works similarly for roles and groups. Any edits you want to make are easy to do. All right, this concludes the webinar.